something
To recapitulate, we are now here with the protocol. These are the other words that we will apply to protocol, methodology, dynamic, or structure. And now we are with keywords related to protocol. And this was generating, is to poetic justice, and then we come to fractal author, which is something that was very important in the lecture of transition, right to authorship, who's the author. And then I came up with this idea of fractal, which is a very Julian term. Fractal, which is something which is infinite, which is limited and yet infinite, like the universe. Like fractals, you know, when everything splits into one, again into two, and the rest is contained, but it is infinite. So the idea of a fractal author is something that I came up as a really happy term to determine how you work. So for instance, here there's a lot of people I have worked with. This of course Barbara, but this is also Michelangelo, and this is also Chantal, and this also have worked with Anthony, and I have worked with Eva a lot of times. So in a way, this idea of fractal author is quite, how to say, it's not a collective, it's not a notion of collective, it's also not a notion of teamwork either. You know, in teamwork that you could imagine that you have like a head of the team, and then of course you have kind of subordinates. This team and subordinates. There is some work, but in the end the author is clearly the chief of the team. Where in the collective there is no, it is just a kind of multiple author, whether it is two people collective or it's 100 people collective, you could point who's doing what. And the idea of the fractal author, I like it because it is like you start something, you set something into motion, and then from that the authors multiply. So I like to think of most of the works I do as this idea to set something in motion, like if you do this trigger, you just throw the stone, and then you actually, from that moment on, you stop being the only author. You have been the author at the moment that you pull the trigger or that you set the stone, but after that you have no control anymore, and there is a lot of different people that are in there where you can. And then in the art system, this is complicated because you always it's hard. How do you have to qualify the people that are in there?
To give them names, positions, and
especially when they have to be paid.
I'll also go back for a second to your slide. Go back, which is the one before, the one which also said situation. Because I think the two things are very much related. That means the possibility of having an author which is not a single author, somebody who writes across one page, is also the ability of setting up a situation, which means the situation is when things are put in the position of happening independently. It's as if one creates a set, a stage or anything, but then it's an open set. It's not that everybody is told in advance what to do or how to react or how things are going to unfold. And of course, I think it's a distraction position for an author to be put in because you don't control that situation. You just create a situation for things to happen inside it. And it's about accepting to let go parts of the control and the authority of being an author. It's about multiplying yourself through many different people and voices and subjective way of thinking and reacting to things. Also other people memories, because memory is again one of those keywords we discussed about before. On X, what, on the basis of what, etc. So I see them as strongly related, the fractal author and the open situation, which is situation.
A fractal author creates situations. And we are still in this idea of protocol. And it's So I have put as an example this piece of this word I was talking when you by which is every work shares every keyword that we spoke about. So the idea of self-regulating and the idea of exploiting justice, all this is contained in this work as well, and in any of the other works. But this idea of the fractal author, it is like this is the reconstruction, which is not a historic reconstruction. It's more like it is to happen again. This is also the idea of repetition. I think I call it the repetition of this work, of this bookstore. So there was a bookstore, to put it very quickly, in 1980 there was what was called the One World Rising, which is very similar in scope and way of happening to La Commune, which maybe you're more familiar with, La Commune in Paris. In these 10 days, the people of Guangzhou stood up against the government, the dictatorship, and created a kind of isolated and independent city where an absolute community where everybody was for everybody else and were able to self-govern themselves and be happy for 10 days. After some days it showed some cracks, this happy community, and as all people, especially old people, started to think that they had to negotiate with the government. When the young people refused to negotiate, they kept the weapons, the army entered the city, and they killed everybody that had a weapon, that were mostly everybody that was between 15 and 25. So there was a massacre, and that was the end of the, like in the community there was a massacre, and I think about more of the people who like also hallucinate, it was the end of this. So this,
sorry, where was that?
In Guangzhou, in Korea, South Korea. So 1980, from the 18th to the 27th May 1980. And so this revolution started in a bookstore. And the bookstore was called the Nocturne bookstore. I won't go too much into detail. But so it was what is called like a socially oriented bookstore where there were presentation of books, where there were discussions, where they printed posters, where they printed forbidden books, where they had forbidden books stored in store. And so for the Guangzhou Biennale it was recreated, this bookstore. But of course you cannot recreate a bookstore like that without counting on the people who were there the first time, and also counting on the people who kept the memory of this bookstore, which disappeared with the massacre. So it stopped existing in the 27th of May 1980. Without counting on the people that were in the first place or that kept the memory, and also without counting on the people that now could play a similar role to the one that was played in 1980. So that means that in this work I contacted maybe 7 or 8 aliens that were the ones that in the end gave the shape to the work. So every element there is coming from memories of people, things that people had at home, descriptions were given to me, and also contemporary bookstores in Guangzhou that kind of share the idea of what kind of titles a bookstore with similar position now in 2016. Plus the collaboration of 2 museums in Guangzhou that lent the information that they had available. So all this is contained in this bookstore. So I could not possibly say that that this is a work of mine, that the author of this work is my humble self, but it is a work in collaboration with everybody that was implicated in the shaping of this, but also, of course, that only existed once that it was said for the public, and this work doesn't exist anymore, in the sense that it has ceased to exist with the end of the Biennale. So this was kind of...
I was just very quickly checking something I remembered. It was when the Guangzhou Biennale opened in 1995, the first edition. They very openly said that it was to commemorate something so horrible which had happened 15 years before, as if the possibility of having artists and art somehow come into that context, something of the terrible memory and something which had been there but unspeakable. kind of intuitive, it also comes to play in a different way. I think that the existence of the therapy thing has a super strong role in shaping the existence of the art there. I mean, it's a sort of an active way of justice.
Yeah, it is collective justice indeed. There is also the idea of self-reference and publicness. There is absolutely the idea of the Christian remembering and working through. Because in the case of when you are rising, it was forbidden to speak about it for 10 years. So that means that was one of the major causes of anger from the people of Anjou, is that they were not allowed to mourn or to talk about it. It was the official story. It had been a riot of violent communists, agents of North Korea, that had to be eliminated to protect democracy. So that was the official story. That only started, which everybody knew it was false. It was this kind of, everybody agreed, this is what we are allowed to say. We all know it's a lie. And only 10 years later it was allowed to speak about the company, songs running around and something. And in the 90s was the moment when this was finally to be said, but it really had happened. It's very touching. Go to an hour on this because I say this is my license, poetic license. The night of the massacre, when it was clear who was going to die, because the people who decided to give up, they went back home, they deposited their weapons. The people who did not deliver the weapons, they waited at night in the early hours for the army to arrive and kill them. There was one girl that was walking around, talking about the ghost, a girl that was walking around the city with a weapon, shouting, "We will fight to the end, do not forget us." So that was the kind of sentence that stuck in the memories of everybody, almost like a kind of guilt. Do not forget us. The girl survived. See that? But this idea that you could not forget this, and you can imagine what it is to be 10 years without being able to remember this properly. They were saying that people were dressing in white, which is the morning color of one youth of Korea, sorry, of Asia, when you are in morning, dressing white. The people could not be forbidden, they could not forbid you to dress in white, but you couldn't say why you were dressing in white. So, yeah, this is very touching.
Well, one of the other things we were discussing before, and it's fun to do it, is back and forth. If it's a brainstorming session, things can be repeated again and again to see how the result may change. But we were talking about this text, which was Daniel Dennett, The Self as a Center of Narrative Gravity, which is from 19, where, in fact, the narration is what becomes possible because the self finds a sort of a way of telling the same story somehow, just to chop it down to the words basics possible. It's not a proper way of working it, but the possibility of sharing a story and telling it, even through different voices and subjectivities, is what in the end constitutes what we could call the self. So I was thinking about how creating a situation where words can come up or can be re-spoken again. There's a way of centering what was out of question for a while. Well, I can also speak about another word which I've seen passing for learning.
Yeah, this comes now with another keyword, and they're getting, you can see now slowly they're getting more and more words. It's assembly is course for the learning and the language. So it's the idea of assembly. Another key word of the protocol is always have something as a set dish in every work that we have this things put in common. This is what we do now is also a form of assembly. In another way, this idea is very strong as well, the area of assembly. It's about the next notion of to get together and to gather together and also to speak to make a plurality of voices, and also the idea of discourse, which I always speak, so everybody speaks about the discourse. As you look at in the dictionary, the definition is a political bond made by language, which is important. So yes, here is the framing.
Yes, this was in documental 13, from 2012, sorry, documental 13 it happens every day.
No, Friday.
Oh, sorry.
On Friday.
But was it screened on Friday before you taking rehearsals?
Yes. It was a talk show.
Yeah.
It was a talk show.
Well, it was the recreation. Of course, it's fun that you talk about the third and the criticism next to you, but the practical version of it. It was the recreation, but physical recreation in terms of reconstructing a stage exactly as it looked originally.
No. This is terrible. Now, the stage was not a recreation. So the idea was to have a talk show called the Plumbing show, but the stage was not relevant. But maybe if you say it to me and say why, I don't know, is there what you want to say?
No, it's okay. I just imagined to remember, and then it just goes me wrong. The background, I mean, was taken from the TV series from the period where it was screened. But maybe it was just a reconstruction. I thought I remembered this, but it doesn't matter.
But it was inspired by a TV show, but it was not, there was never a TV show called Plumbing.
No. It's just talking basically about the physical set.
I know. It's a typical 70s television set, yes.
And so within the context of that talk show, the arguments discussed were in fact quite the opposite of what is usually brought about within such a light context, because it was very site-specific in terms of referring to the history of the castle and the relation that a number of terrorist actors, cultural operator agents, and so on had with the city during 60s and 70s. But also in creating possibilities, in part for the same people, in part from other people, but implementing on things which have happened to literally discuss. But also, it was a talk show. So also with the format of what a talk show is. Entertaining or supposedly entertaining.
It was not entertaining? What do you mean?
Well,
look. They are entertaining.
But there was also some voices which were not really, they were stepping in and out of the stage, so the situation was very complex. But again, as everybody was performing themselves and within a situation, there were many possibilities of things being expressed. And then script was kind of happening, but afterwards being recorded and becoming the script of what had happened. Whereas it was also screened as a proper talk show, etc. Broadcast.
And this is very interesting in relation to the text. There is a text from everything. This is the text of a Campbell. This repetition and difference and repetition in the work of the work or something like that. But he defines repetition there as that can be repeated and yet is also unique. Using this notion of the opposite situation, and in situations that can be repeated and yet it is also unique. talking about the situationism, the situation according to the situationist. So in that case, the idea of a talk show, it is referred to this format or this structure, but is repeated all the time, every time it is different. Because even if you respect, you always have the same, you all know talk shows, some are better than others, but you have a kind of very pretty structure where there's always a monologue, and there's comedy talk shows, there always have a monologue, then you have the guest, you also have some music numbers, you have a lot of different figures that are like the sidekick, which is this guy which is normally playing music, which is the one with that functions as a kind of respondent of the main presenter. They of course have a main presenter. So you have all these kind of formats, but then it is nevertheless different all the time. If you respect these things, this is a bit, I relate this to the idea of situation.
One word to ask people to discuss what they're
you are running workshop.
My favorite word would be again assembly in this case. How one can build an assembly over how the appearance of work in the public context can generate that sort of situations where keep using the same terms to talk to each other, but how do you feel about that? How do you respond about that? How interested you are in this dimension or not interested in this dimension and so on?
Oh, just curious about how do you deal with what is supposed to be forgotten and what is supposed to be remembered? How do you discern that? How do you, I mean, what if you're remembering something that some people don't want to be remembered? They're really affected by it, like they don't want to talk about what happened. And then you're trying to commemorate something that really happened, like, and somehow, but it's still affecting that people. How do you forget it and remember it? Like, it's, I don't know if that's clear.
I did read like an author or someone else about to produce something.
Yeah, like how do you know that people are going to be affected? Like remembering something, or
yeah, and so it is maybe what you do not remember the actual number.
Exactly. How do you measure that? How do you? It's very us, an outsider, do that to a culture and then.
Well, we have a wonderful example with the work of Jonas, with what happened in Norway, with the, how is it called, this movement, so it's the public.
Victoria,
I know this work, but I work with it.
The one outside.
The outside.
There's a discussion.
People who say that it's too harsh, the environment is too difficult, it's too hard for them to
know, part of the critique against the work is that the work doesn't have any forgiveness. There's no forgiveness in that work because it maintains the gap. So this is something that can never be repaired if you sort of look at it.
And as economists who say, indeed.
Would it be repaired? Is it possible to repair?
Yeah, that's the question. Some people said that this work is too harsh because it has no forgiveness in it. While other people say, yeah, but we can't forgive. It has to be an open wound.
But it's not only about forgiveness, it's about the fact that you stand on the other side and you look at the names of. So it's not about the forgiveness, it's also about going on with your life.
Yeah.
And accepting the death of your beloved and feeling grief.
Yeah. Well, of course, I'm just referring to the kind of reactions that have been in the media and pronounced by different people that are positioned different to that work.
Just to answer for what you mean, but my impression would be that by not having just one single way of expressing something which happened, and by multiplying voices, sometimes things change, because you don't have one perspective you can clash against, maybe you have more. And by multiplying narratives, then things can be told very differently in my experience.
But everyone remembers so differently. Like, not everyone remembers the same thing.
Of course.
And how can you interpret what they remember? I mean, it's so difficult for me to...
It's very much related to the injustice. Because, so I say, all this is very much related, you could say, indeed, it is too harsh. You can also say, well, it was harsh. In the sense that you cannot be miles remembering something like this. You need for 9/11 again, and you know, I don't know exactly what they did at the end. So how can you the day of commemoration or monument? How do you commemorate something that is so absolutely horrible? And yet you have to say you cannot prevent, you cannot go on with your life. Unless you find the right way to remember this. This is about the idea of justice. So you have, this is related to in all kind of levels. So if you don't accept the death, in Spain, for instance, we have this ongoing discussion that you never prepare, but you still have dead people that are not properly buried, so people who were murdered in mass from Kisma. And that you don't get the permission to get them out, starting by the local. And it is, of course, there is people who think we will never get anywhere before we solve this. And other people say, well, you know, if you remove this, then we will never get anywhere. Because if you keep talking about the dead, and if you keep talking about this kind of thing, we will never get anywhere. So there are two different positions how to reconcile this. I would say, in my opinion, which is the psychoanalytical opinion, you say you can, nothing is ever healed. Everything is always there, and you only can keep, the only possible closer you can get to healing something is by looking at it straightforward. You really have to confront your memory, you really have to confront the wounds. This is the only way you will get rid of it. Otherwise, it will always come back. It will keep coming back like a ghost. It's coming back because it will not be able to kill. So this is one position, and other people say you can't, you should not remove this. It's better to leave it like in the closet, a skeleton in the closet, because when you get the skeleton out, then it will be very well. It's different opinions, but it is related to all this justice
It's also just to bring up the two examples and the monument for 9/11, it's just basically two massive holes.
Yeah.
As if something is missing.
And sometimes this was only a hole or a cut. Something that is not there, it seems to be not appropriate.
The missing, the ghost, what you don't want to see because it's just too painful. Sometimes it's what you actually need to be confronted with in order to be able to start speaking about it. I mean, healing, it's a very individual process, I think, but language can be a way of creating that gap, that bridge, sorry. Speaking about it is one way of starting to find ways of dealing with it, at least.
But what she seemed to ask is that, isn't it a bit, she seemed to question the fact that having a monument like that is, it has an effect because it also has authorization, and so the fact that it has been placed there, I'm concerned by the possibility that some people might find it distasteful or hurtful or whatever. There's this notion of authorization that it goes back also to this notion of assembly that we were talking about just now, which is interesting. You can activate assembly anytime. We could just just go out and like a small assembly and see if I can manage to gather 5 people. And then it goes back to this idea of what's authorized and what's not. And I mean, for me, it's very fascinating that Dora, for example, manages that in context like art exhibitions or biennials to activate this spaces. But then I also think that it's, we're lucky in a way. I mean, she has a space that has this authorization, and sometimes when I speak, for example, with younger artists or people who are struggling to produce work, I see that sometimes the need for assembly and create discourse then has a different impact, because, I mean, then you move underground and it still has an interesting effect and mythology and all that it activates. But I'm interested very much in this thing, what's authorized and what's not, and what she was saying just now seemed to be about the fact that, yes, some decision was made. Was there a referendum for this monument? I guess no. So.
Oh, there was a public contest there, so.
And at the same time, there are narrative or constructions of situations, and they are not asking for recognition. The media is writing about this situation, and each newspaper, every newspaper is talking about this thing. And they are so attractive already there. Why do we have to be like? Why do we have to? I think it's important for the artists also that they all deal with it, and the political justice that is there. It's not just us working with the knowledge or this idea of the past, or this trauma.
Yeah, but the monument is still both is not built yet, and there's another monument which is built, or several different places actually. It was an important part of the discussion as well that it was that the neighbors living there who strongly resisted it because they did not choose not to see it. And we have this very traditional way of dealing with one like the graveyard, which you can visit when you want to. So I think that was kind of a main issue there as well. It was kind of not possible to escape it for the people who actually dive into the water to help people and who had people getting killed. That was closest to it. But they have got a monument on this island exchange where part of deciding what to be and which were, in the first where they could come when they wanted to. So I think that is kind of missing link in the discussion as well.
There's something more so that a monument that exists is a monument on the island, and that is raised privately by the youth organization, the labor youth organization, and that is a private monument, and you can't visit it. It's only on the island.
Well, the people living there.
There's no people living on the island.
No, but close.
You can't, but there is no regular boat traffic. You have to have
But it's really a place for families to go and meditate upon their loss. For the family. But then also by the people affected, close by,
No, but it's interesting because you talk about missing links, and somehow these missing links are spaces to activate additional narratives. I don't know, it's just, maybe I'm not sure if it's just something. Try to get with that story.